The phone buzzed against the polished surface of my coffee table, a harsh, intrusive sound that sliced through the Sunday morning silence. I'd been staring at the same page of a book for 20 minutes, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. My life felt like that page, a collection of symbols I was supposed to understand, but which offered no story, no meaning. The caller ID flashed a name I associated only with fluorescent lighting, the scent of industrial-grade coffee, and the low, persistent hum of deadlines. Julian Vance. My boss. My thumb hovered over the decline button. A Sunday call from Julian was an anomaly, a disruption of the natural order. Our relationship was strictly professional, defined by the four walls of his corner office and the carefully curated space between his mahogany desk and my visitor's chair. He was the CEO, a man who moved with a quiet, gravitational pull, drawing all eyes and silencing all chatter when he entered a room. I was a senior analyst, good at my job, invisible in my life. We were two separate solar systems that only intersected on weekdays between 9 and 5. Curiosity, or perhaps just the sheer, pathetic lack of anything better to do, won out. I answered. Leo, he said. His voice was the same as it always was, a low, calm baritone that could soothe frayed nerves or cut through boardroom arguments with equal, unnerving ease. It sounded different without the backdrop of office noise, richer and closer. I know it's Sunday. I apologize. Can you come into the office? My mind raced through possibilities. A corporate emergency. A system failure. A forgotten report that was somehow my fault. Of course. Is everything all right? A pause stretched down the line, filled with a static I couldn't place. Everything's fine. I just need a second pair of eyes on the sterling proposal. I'm here now. The building will be empty. Just us. The thought landed with a strange weight in my chest. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, my voice sounding more steady than I felt. The drive into the city was surreal. The weekend had bleached the world of its usual frantic energy. The skyscraper that housed Vance and Sterling Financial stood like a silent, glass and steel monolith against the pale sky. The security guard, a man named George whose entire conversational repertoire consisted of grunts and nods, let me in with a flicker of surprise in his tired eyes. The elevator ascended in a soundless glide, the numbers climbing like a pressure gauge. The 35th floor was a ghost town. The open-plan office, usually a hive of ringing phones and clacking keyboards, was cavernous and still. The only light came from the far end of the hall, a warm, yellow glow spilling from the frosted glass of Julian's office. The silence was so profound I could hear the soft scuff of my own dress shoes on the plush carpet. It felt like walking into a sanctuary or a tomb. I tapped lightly on his door. Come in, his voice called, muffled by the heavy wood. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scene was not one of corporate crisis. Julian wasn't frantically shuffling papers or barking into his phone. He was standing by the vast, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling city, his back to me. He wore dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He held a glass of what looked like whiskey, the amber liquid catching the morning light. The sterling proposal was nowhere in sight. Leo, thank you for coming, he said, turning slowly. My first coherent thought was that I had never seen him without a suit jacket and tie. The simple white shirt changed the lines of his body, revealing the broad set of his shoulders, the lean strength in his arms. My second thought was that his eyes, a deep, unreadable shade of gray, were fixed on me with an intensity that felt entirely outside the bounds of our professional relationship. No problem, I managed, my hand clutching the strap of my messenger bag like a lifeline. The proposal? He took a slow sip from his glass, his gaze never leaving mine. There is no proposal. My heart gave a sharp, painful thud against my ribs. I felt a sudden, dizzying sense of being untethered, of having walked into a room where the rules I understood no longer applied. I don't understand. He set his glass down on the corner of his immaculate desk. The soft clink of glass on wood was the only sound in the room. He walked towards me, his movements unhurried, deliberate. He stopped when there was only a few feet of air between us, an impossibly small distance that crackled with unspoken energy. The air was thick with the scent of him, not his usual subtle, expensive cologne, but something more fundamental. Sandalwood, clean linen, and the faint, sharp tang of whiskey. "You looked stressed," he said, his voice dropping to an even lower register. "On Friday. All week, really." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I had been stressed. A looming project deadline, a fight with my landlord, the general, grinding loneliness of my existence. I was an expert at hiding it, at maintaining a facade of competent, unruffled calm. I had assumed no one noticed. I had assumed I was invisible. "I'm fine," I lied. A small, ghost of a smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Your tie is crooked." I glanced down. He was right. In my haste to leave, I'd knotted it carelessly. My hands moved to fix it, clumsy and fumbling. Here his voice was a soft command. "Let me." Before I could process the words, before I could protest or step back, he closed the remaining distance between us. His hands came up, not to my tie, but to the knot at my throat. His fingers were warm, the heat seeping through the silk of the tie, through the cotton of my shirt, branding my skin. My breath hitched. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the dark stubble shadowing his jaw, the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow. I had seen him 1,000 times across a desk, but this close, he was a different man entirely. He was real. He didn't fix the knot. Instead, his fingers worked with an agonizing slowness, loosening it, pulling the silk free. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. His knuckles brushed against the column of my throat, a touch so light it was barely there, but it sent a tremor through my entire body. I stood frozen, caught in the tractor beam of his gray eyes. This is happening. The thought was a whisper in the screaming silence of my mind. He drew the tie completely free, letting it slip from his fingers to pool on the floor between us. Then, his hand came up again, his thumb brushing slowly, deliberately, against the pulse that throbbed at the base of my throat. He watched my eyes as he did it, his own expression unreadable, intense. "Better," he murmured, his voice a gravelly rumble that vibrated straight through me. He took a small step back, breaking the spell. The air rushed back into my lungs, cold and sharp. I felt lightheaded, my entire world tilted on its axis. He had called me into an empty office building on a Sunday morning under a false pretense, not to reprimand me, not to fire me, but to loosen my tie and touch my throat. The breath he had just stolen from me was the first real thing I had felt all week. And as I stood there, tie-less and trembling in his silent office, I knew with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological torture, orchestrated by my own overactive imagination. Monday morning, I walked into the office feeling like I was wearing a scarlet letter. Every glance in my direction felt loaded, every casual, "good morning," a veiled inquiry. I half expected a memo to have been circulated. Leo Bellwether, now prone to weekend office encounters of the unprofessional kind. Of course, nothing had changed. The world continued to spin. My colleagues complained about the bad coffee and gossiped about the marketing department. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune. And Julian Vance. Julian Vance was exactly the same. He was my boss. He strode through the office with that same quiet authority. He led the morning meeting with his usual incisive clarity, his gray eyes sweeping over the boardroom table, never lingering on me for a second longer than anyone else. He was professional, courteous, distant. He was the Julian I had known for 3 years. It was maddening. Did I imagine it? The thought gnawed at me. Had the stress and loneliness finally conspired to create a vivid, tactile hallucination? But I could still feel the phantom warmth of his fingers on my skin, still smell the ghost of sandalwood and whiskey in the sterile office air. I had picked my tie up off his floor. It was real. I found myself watching him. It started as a subconscious act, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist, and quickly spiraled into a full-blown, obsessive study. I became an anthropologist of Julian Vance. I learned the way he would rub the back of his neck when a conference call was going poorly. I noticed the way his left eyebrow, the one with the scar, would arch ever so slightly when someone presented an idea that intrigued him. I saw the tension in his jaw when he was concentrating, the almost imperceptible softening of his features when he took a call from his sister, whose picture sat on his credenza. He never gave any indication that he was aware of my scrutiny. Our interactions were brief, formal, and agonizingly normal. He'd stop by my desk to ask about a data point, his voice crisp and businesslike. "Bellwether, do you have the Q3 projections?" His hand would rest for a moment on the back of my chair, a perfectly normal, collegial gesture that made my entire nervous system short-circuit. The warmth of his palm would seep through the fabric, a stark reminder of that Sunday, and I would have to force myself to breathe evenly, to deliver the numbers without my voice cracking. One afternoon, I was working late, trying to untangle a particularly nasty spreadsheet. The office was quiet, most everyone having fled for the day. I was so engrossed that I didn't hear him approach. "Burning the midnight oil, Leo." I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. He was leaning against the frame of my cubicle, arms crossed over his chest. He'd shed his suit jacket, and his shirt sleeves were once again rolled up his forearms. The casual posture felt dangerously familiar. "Just trying to make these numbers make sense," I said, gesturing vaguely at my screen. My voice sounded thin. He walked over, his presence seeming to shrink the already small space. He leaned in, his shoulder brushing mine as he looked at the monitor. The heat from his body was immediate, a tangible force. I held my breath. The scent of him, that clean, masculine scent, filled my senses. I could feel the fine hairs on my arm, standing on end. "You're looking at it backwards," he said, his voice a low rumble next to my ear. "You need to reverse the axis on the Y parameter." His hand came up, and for a terrifying, hopeful second, I thought he was going to touch me. Instead, his finger hovered over the screen, pointing to the offending data set. His finger was long, blunt-tipped, clean. I stared at it, mesmerized. "Right," I breathed. "Of course." He straightened up, and the space around me felt suddenly cold and empty. "Don't stay too late," he said, his tone back to its usual professional warmth. "The work will be here tomorrow." He walked away, his footsteps silent on the carpet. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, staring at the screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was nothing. It was a boss helping an employee, a perfectly reasonable, unremarkable interaction. But it felt like everything. The ambiguity was the worst part. Every small gesture became a clue to be deciphered, a breadcrumb in a forest of my own making. A lingering look in a meeting. Was it a silent acknowledgement of our shared secret, or was he just thinking about profit margins? His hand brushing mine as he passed me a file. Was it an accident, or a deliberate, fleeting touch? I was driving myself insane, replaying every moment, dissecting every word, every glance, every fractional shift in his expression. I was a man starving, and he was feeding me scraps. A few weeks after the Sunday incident, the company held its annual charity gala. It was a mandatory affair, a black-tie evening of stiff conversation and mediocre champagne. I hated it. I felt like a child playing dress-up in my rented tuxedo, an imposter among the city's financial elite. I was nursing a glass of champagne near a potted fern, doing my best to look thoughtfully engaged with the foliage, when he found me. He looked impossibly handsome in his tuxedo, the stark black and white setting off his dark hair and gray eyes. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace that I could only envy. "Hiding from the sharks, Bellwether?" he asked, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time since that Sunday. It transformed his face, softening the severe lines of his jaw. "Just admiring the local flora," I said, my attempt at a witty retort falling flat. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "It's a ficus. I'm fairly sure it's plastic." He stood beside me, our shoulders almost touching. We watched the swirling crowd in a comfortable silence for a moment. It felt strangely intimate, the two of us existing in a small bubble amidst the noise and chatter. "You clean up well," he said, his voice quiet, meant only for me. His gaze swept over me, a quick, appraising look that felt like a physical touch. I felt a flush creep up my neck. "You too," I mumbled, feeling like an idiot. Later in the evening, as people began to migrate towards the ballroom for dinner, there was a crush of bodies near the doorway. I was jostled from behind, stumbling forward. A hand shot out, warm and firm on the small of my back, steadying me. I knew it was his without even looking. His hand didn't move away immediately. It lingered there, a point of searing heat through the fabric of my jacket, guiding me through the crowd. It was a protective gesture, a possessive one. My mind reeled. Was this for show? A CEO looking out for his employee? Or was it something more? When we reached our assigned table, his hand finally dropped away, and the loss of contact was a physical ache. He sat at the head of the table, surrounded by board members and their spouses. I was seated halfway down, between a woman from accounting who only talked about her cats and a man from legal who was already drunk. Throughout the dinner, through the interminable speeches and the clatter of silverware, I felt his eyes on me. I'd glance up, and his gaze would be there, steady and unreadable from across the expanse of white linen and crystal glasses. He wouldn't look away when I met his eyes. He'd just hold my gaze for a beat too long, a silent, charged communication that no one else at the table could see. Each time it happened, my food would turn to ash in my mouth. I was living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a sign, a confirmation, a word that would make sense of the trembling tension that now defined my entire existence. He had loosened my tie, and in doing so, had unraveled the neat, orderly fabric of my life. I was adrift, and he was the only landmark in a vast, terrifying sea, and I had no idea if he was a lighthouse or a storm. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation in a rain-swept street or a whispered confession in a darkened room. It was absurd, mundane, and involved a malfunctioning piece of office equipment in a city that wasn't our own. We were in Chicago for a 3-day tech conference. It was a trip I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. 3 days of forced proximity. 3 days of analyzing every shared elevator ride, every brief conversation over lukewarm conference coffee. It was my own personal heaven and hell. A scheduling snafu by the corporate travel agency had booked us into a 2-bedroom suite instead of separate rooms. The booking was non-refundable, the hotel was full, and Julian had waved away my flustered apologies with a calm, "It's fine, Leo. We're both adults." Fine was not the word I would have chosen. The suite was luxurious, with a shared living area and a kitchenette separating our 2 private bedrooms. But the knowledge that he was just on the other side of a wall, sleeping, breathing, existing in the same private space, was enough to make my skin hum with a low-grade electrical current. The first day of the conference was a blur of keynote speakers and breakout sessions. We maintained a professional distance, sitting together but rarely speaking, both absorbed in our notepads and laptops. It was in the evening, back in the quiet of our suite, that the carefully constructed walls began to crumble. We were both working in the living area, me on the sofa with my laptop, him at the small dining table. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable, domestic quiet that felt both completely new and strangely familiar. We'd ordered room service, and the remnants of our meal sat on the coffee table between us. It felt less like a business trip and more like something else. Something I didn't dare put a name to. "The projector for my presentation tomorrow is a different model than the one we have at the office," he said, breaking the silence. He was frowning at his laptop. "The adapter isn't working. I need to test the file. The hotel business center should have one we can borrow," I offered, glad for a simple, solvable problem. The business center was a small, sad room on the mezzanine level, smelling faintly of toner and desperation. It was also, as we discovered, locked for the night. "Damn it," Julian muttered, rattling the handle. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd never seen from him before. It was a crack in the impossibly smooth facade, and it was strangely endearing. "There's a 24-hour electronics store about 6 blocks from here," I said, pulling up a map on my phone. We could walk. The Chicago night was cool and damp, the air smelling of rain and exhaust. The city lights smeared against the dark sky. We walked in silence for the first few blocks, the rhythm of our footsteps on the pavement the only sound between us. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface all day began to feel sharp and acute in the anonymity of the dark streets. "My father was an architect," Julian said suddenly, his voice quiet. I was so startled by the non sequitur, the offering of a personal detail, that it took me a moment to respond. "Oh, he loved this city," he continued, his gaze lifting to the tops of the skyscrapers that towered over us. He saw it as a monument to human ambition. The sheer will it takes to build something this permanent, he paused. He thought finance was a coward's profession, moving numbers around on a screen, creating nothing real. I didn't know what to say. This was a version of Julian I had never seen, a glimpse behind the curtain of the confident CEO. This was a son talking about his father. I don't think that's true, I said softly. You build things. You build careers. You build security for hundreds of employees. He looked at me then, his gray eyes searching my face in the dim glow of the streetlights. The ever-present mask of command was gone, replaced by something more open, more vulnerable. It was a look that stole the air from my lungs. You always know the right thing to say, don't you, Leo? He said, and it wasn't an accusation. It sounded almost like a marvel. We found the store, a fluorescent-lit cavern of wires and gadgets. We were wandering the aisles, looking for the right adapter, when the absurdity of the situation struck me. Here we were, the CEO and a senior analyst of a major financial firm, hunting for a $5 piece of plastic at 10 o'clock at night. The tension, the yearning, the weeks of agonizing uncertainty, it all suddenly seemed ridiculous. I started to laugh, a quiet, helpless chuckle. Julian turned to me, a questioning look on his face. What? This is just weird, I said, gesturing around us. Us. Here. Looking for a dongle. A slow smile spread across his face, the real one that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. It was like the sun coming out. I suppose it is. His smile faded slightly, replaced by that same intense, searching look from the street. Do you ever feel like you're just playing a part, Leo? Like you're wearing a costume every day and you're terrified someone will pull it off? The question was so direct, so perceptive, it felt like he had reached into my chest and touched the frantic, hidden core of me. My carefully constructed persona, the competent analyst, the quiet professional, was my armor. It was all I had. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. Me too, he whispered, the admission hanging in the air between us, as fragile and precious as spun glass. In that moment, in the harsh, unflattering light of an all-night electronics store, surrounded by charging cables and knockoff headphones, he was no longer my boss. He was just a man, admitting a fear that mirrored my own. We found the adapter, paid the sleepy cashier, and walked back to the hotel. The silence on the return journey was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the weight of his confession, with the quiet hum of a shared vulnerability. Back in the suite, he plugged the adapter into his laptop and the projector we had borrowed from the front desk. His presentation flashed onto the blank white wall of the living room, a series of complex charts and graphs. It works, he said, his voice laced with relief. He turned to me. Thank you, Leo. I appreciate your help. Anytime, I said, my voice hoarse. We stood there for a moment, the projector casting shifting blue and white light across his face. The professional roles we had inhabited for so long felt like ill-fitting suits we could finally shed. The distance between us had collapsed, not through a grand gesture, but through a locked business center, a late-night walk, and a moment of unexpected, startling honesty. He had shown me a piece of himself, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that I would never be able to look at him as just my boss again. The foundation had shifted beneath my feet, and I was waiting, with a heart full of dread and hope, for the whole structure to come down. The final day of the conference was capped by a networking reception, a loud, crowded affair held in a hotel ballroom with questionable carpeting and an overzealous smoke machine. It was the kind of event I excelled at fading into the background of, a human wallpaper. But tonight, things were different. The shared vulnerability of the previous evening had created a new, invisible tether between Julian and me. I was acutely aware of him, of his location in the room at all times, as if he were a magnetic north and I a compass needle. I was trying to extricate myself from a conversation with a tech bro who kept using the word synergize when I saw her approaching Julian. Clarissa Hale. She was a venture capitalist from a rival firm, sharp-tongued and famously ruthless. She and Julian had history. The office rumor mill whispered about a past relationship that had ended badly. She moved with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood in the water. She cornered him near the bar, her smile bright and brittle. I couldn't hear their words, but I could read the language of their bodies. Her hand on his arm, his stiff posture, the tight set of his jaw. He looked trapped. After a few minutes, he caught my eye from across the room. It was a fleeting, desperate glance, a silent plea for rescue. Before I could even think about what I was doing, my feet were moving. I walked towards them, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. What was I going to do? Interrupt and ask about a fictional report? Pretend to spill a drink on her? My mind was blank. As I got closer, I caught the tail end of their conversation. So you're still playing the lone wolf, Julian? Thought you would have settled down by now. Or are you still too busy building your empire to make time for anyone? Clarissa's voice was laced with a sickly sweet poison. Julian's face was a thundercloud. My personal life is none of your business, Clarissa. Oh, I'm sure, she purred, her eyes flicking over to me as I came to a stop beside Julian. Her gaze was dismissive, cataloging my ill-fitting conference suit and my general air of social anxiety. And who is this? Your new intern. Something inside me snapped. It was a quiet, clean break. The years of feeling invisible, of playing a part, of hiding, it all fell away. And in its place was a sudden, fierce surge of protectiveness. But it was Julian who acted first. He turned to me, and the look in his eyes was a mixture of apology and something else, something wild and reckless. He reached out, his hand cupping the back of my neck, his thumb pressing gently into the sensitive skin below my ear. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to my core. Leo is not my intern, Julian said, his voice low and steady, his eyes locked on mine. The entire world seemed to narrow to the space between us, the noise of the ballroom fading to a distant hum. He's with me. Clarissa let out a disbelieving laugh. With you? Julian Vance, you haven't been with anyone in years. Julian's gaze didn't waver from mine. There was a question in his eyes, a silent request for permission. Trust me. I gave a barely perceptible nod, my entire body trembling. What happens next is a blur. Time slows down, stretching like warm taffy. He closes the small distance between us. His other hand comes up to cradle my jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle. The scent of him, clean and familiar, fills my senses. And then his lips are on mine. It is not a chaste, performative peck. It is a kiss. It is firm and sure and breathtakingly real. For a split second, my mind screams in panic, a cacophony of what are you doing, this is our boss, this is a public place. But then the warmth of his mouth, the soft pressure, the sheer, undeniable reality of it, silences everything. My eyes flutter shut. My hands, of their own accord, come up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart through the fabric of his shirt. It's not a long kiss, but it holds an entire universe of unspoken things. It's a claim, a defense, a confession. It's the answer to every question I've been afraid to ask. When he pulls back, his forehead rests against mine for a heartbeat. His breath is warm on my skin. I open my eyes. He is looking at me, his gray eyes dark and turbulent, searching my face for a reaction. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can only feel the ghost of his lips on mine, a burning imprint. He turns his head slightly to look at Clarissa. Her face is a mask of stunned disbelief, her mouth slightly agape. As I said, Julian says, his voice perfectly calm, though I can feel the slight tremor in the hand still resting on my neck. He's with me. Now, if you'll excuse us. Without another word, he takes my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. The contact is grounding, a solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. He leads me away from the bar, through the gawking crowd, his stride purposeful. No one says a word. We are a silent, moving island in a sea of stunned faces. He doesn't stop until we are out of the ballroom, in the quiet, empty hallway. The silence that descends is heavier than any noise. He lets go of my hand, and the loss is immediate, a sudden coldness. We stand facing each other under the harsh, institutional lighting of the hotel corridor. He won't look at me. He's staring at a point on the patterned carpet, his jaw tight. I'm sorry, he says, his voice rough. I shouldn't have done that. I put you in an impossible position. My mind is still reeling, my lips still tingling. The word sorry feels like a slap. Was that all it was? A tactic? A way to win a social chess match against an old rival? The hope that had soared so dizzyingly high just moments before comes crashing down, leaving a bitter, hollow ache in its wake. It's fine, I say, the words tasting like lies. My own voice sounds distant, detached. I need to get away, to go back to my room and piece together the shattered fragments of my composure. I understand. You had to get out of a situation. No, he says, his head snapping up. His eyes finally meet mine, and they are blazing with an emotion I can't name. It's not anger. It's something closer to desperation. You don't understand. He takes a step closer, and I instinctively take a step back, my back hitting the cool wall of the corridor. He follows, trapping me, his hands coming up to brace the wall on either side of my head. We are close again, close enough for me to see the frantic pulse beating in his throat, the one my own thumb had once felt. "That wasn't for her, Leo," he says, his voice low and intense, a raw, ragged whisper. "Do you hear me? None of this is for her." His gaze drops to my mouth, and my breath catches in my throat. The air between us is thick, heavy, charged with months of unspoken tension, of longing looks and near-miss touches. The performance is over. The audience is gone. There is no one to fool. There is only this. Only us. "I have been going out of my mind," he breathes, the confession torn from him. "Ever since that Sunday. Watching you. Wanting to." He trails off, shaking his head as if to clear it. I am so far past the line of what's appropriate, I can't even see it anymore. My heart is a wild thing in my chest, beating against my ribs like it wants to escape. This is it. The breaking point. The moment where everything either shatters or solidifies into something new and terrifying and beautiful. "Julian," I whisper, his name a prayer on my lips. "Tell me to stop," he says, his voice cracking with a vulnerability I never thought possible from this man. His eyes are pleading with me, giving me an out that I don't want to take. "Tell me I've read this all wrong, that I've crossed a line, and I will walk away. I will go back to being your boss, and we will never speak of this again. Just say the word." The word is lodged in my throat. I can't say it. I don't want to say it. All the fear, the loneliness, the quiet, desperate yearning of my life seems to well up inside me. I have spent years being invisible, being safe. And in one reckless, public kiss, he has seen me. He has made me real. I shake my head, a small, jerky movement. "Don't stop." I breathe, the words barely audible. Relief washes over his face, so profound it's like watching a mass crumble. And then he is kissing me again. And this time, there is no performance, no audience, no subtext. It is not for show. It is for us. It is nothing like the first kiss. It is slow and deep and hungry. It is a question and an answer all at once. His mouth is warm and searching against mine, and I open for him without a second thought. My hands, which had been pressed flat against the wall, come up to grip his shoulders, pulling him closer, trying to erase what little space is left between us. His hands leave the wall, one tangling in my hair, tilting my head back, the other sliding down to rest on the small of my back, pressing me into him. It is messy and desperate and honest. It is the taste of expensive wine and the underlying flavor of him. It's the sound of our ragged breaths in the silent hallway. It's the feeling of his body, hard and warm, pressed against mine. It's the culmination of months of stolen glances, of accidental touches, of agonizing uncertainty. It's the feeling of coming home to a place I never knew I was searching for. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless, our chests rising and falling in unison. He rests his forehead against mine again, his eyes closed. I can feel the tremor running through his body, or maybe it's my own. "Leo," he murmurs, his voice thick with emotion. He doesn't say anything else. He doesn't have to. His name for me, spoken like that, holds everything. He straightens up, but he doesn't let me go. His hand is still tangled in my hair, his other arm wrapped firmly around my waist. He looks down the empty corridor, then back at me. A decision flickers in his eyes. He leans in, his lips brushing against my ear. "My room," he says, the two words a low, gravelly promise that sends a shiver down my spine. I can only nod, incapable of speech. He takes my hand again, his grip tight and reassuring, and leads me down the hallway, away from the distant party music, away from the world of before. Each step feels momentous, a step into a new, uncharted territory. I don't know where we are going, not really. But for the first time in a very, very long time, I am not afraid of being lost. I am with him, and that feels more right than anything has ever felt before. The walk to his room was the longest 10 yards of my life. Every footstep echoed in the preternatural quiet of the hotel corridor. His hand in mine was a warm, solid anchor, the only thing keeping me from floating away on a tidal wave of shock and elation and pure, unadulterated terror. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by the force of his kiss, his confession. All I could feel was the rough texture of his skin against mine, the heat of his palm. He stopped in front of his door, the one directly opposite mine in our shared suite. He fumbled with the key card, his usually steady hands betraying a slight tremor. The soft click of the lock opening sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He pushed the door open and led me inside, closing it firmly behind us. The room was dark, the only light a pale silver sliver from the gap in the heavy curtains, painting a stripe across the floor and the king-sized bed. The darkness was a blessing. It felt safer, more intimate. We stood just inside the door, not speaking, our breath still ragged. He let go of my hand, and the loss was a physical pang. I could just make out his silhouette against the faint light from the window. He was watching me. I could feel it. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, stripped of all its boardroom authority. It was just Julian's voice. "I don't know what I am," I answered honestly, the words coming out in a rush of air. I don't know." He took a step towards me, closing the distance between us once more. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "If this is too much," he started, but I cut him off. "It's not," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "It's not too much. It's everything." I saw his shoulders relax in the dim light. He reached out, his hand gently cupping my cheek. His thumb stroked slowly over my skin, a soothing, hypnotic gesture. "Good," he murmured. "Because for me, too." He leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the ones in the hallway. It was unhurried, exploratory. It was a conversation without words. It spoke of discovery, of relief, of a deep, bone-weary longing finally being answered. My hands found their way to his waist, gripping the fabric of his shirt as if to assure myself he was real, that this was all real. His hands moved from my face, sliding down my arms, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin through my suit jacket. He pulled back slightly, his lips brushing against mine as he spoke. "Too many clothes," he whispered, and I let out a shaky laugh that was half a sob. Slowly, reverently, we began to undress each other. It was clumsy and awkward, a fumbling of buttons and zippers in the near darkness. My fingers trembled as I unknotted his tie, the expensive silk cool against my skin. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he helped me out of my jacket, letting it fall to the floor. Each layer removed felt like shedding a skin, peeling away the roles of boss and employee until it was just Julian and Leo left. The air was cool on my bare skin, but everywhere he touched, I was on fire. His palms were warm and slightly rough as they slid up my chest, his fingers mapping the lines of my ribs. I shivered, not from cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming sensation of it. No one had ever touched me with such tenderness, such deliberate focus. It felt like he was memorizing me. We ended up by the bed, a tangle of limbs and soft whispers. The moonlight from the window caught the scar on his eyebrow, the intense look in his eyes as he looked down at me. I felt a sudden wave of insecurity, a lifetime of feeling inadequate and unseen rushing to the surface. He must have seen it in my eyes. "You are beautiful," he said, his voice thick. The words were so simple, so direct, they bypassed all my defenses and landed directly in the center of my heart. A tear escaped the corner of my eye and traced a hot path down my temple. He leaned down and kissed it away. What followed was not a frenzy of passion, but a slow, deliberate act of worship. He learned my body with his hands and his mouth, discovering every sensitive spot, every place that made me arch and gasp his name. He moved with a patience and a certainty that left no room for fear, only a rising tide of pleasure that was so intense it bordered on pain. He taught me what it was to be wanted, to be cherished. And I, in turn, explored him. The solid muscle of his shoulders, the surprising softness of the skin at his hips, the way a low groan would rumble in his chest when I traced the line of his collarbone with my lips. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way his heart hammered against my palm. It was a language my body had always known how to speak, but had never had the chance. When we finally came together, it was with a sense of inevitability, as if our bodies were two halves of a whole finally clicking into place. It was a collision of heat and friction and whispered words. I clung to him, my face buried in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of him, trying to absorb this moment into my very cells. It was overwhelming, a sensory overload that short-circuited my brain. It was the furthest thing from the sterile, lonely life I had known. It was raw and messy and profoundly, achingly alive. Afterwards, we lay tangled in the sheets, our bodies slick with sweat, the sound of our breathing the only noise in the room. His arm was a heavy, comforting weight across my chest, his head resting on my shoulder. I could feel the steady, slowing beat of his heart against my ribs. I stared up at the unfamiliar ceiling, my mind a quiet, peaceful blank for the first time in years. The constant hum of anxiety that had been my lifelong companion was gone. In its place was a deep, resonant calm. I must have drifted off. I woke with a start to the feeling of the bed shifting. I opened my eyes. The room was still dark, but Julian was sitting up, his back to me. A wave of cold, familiar panic washed over me. Regret. This is the part where he regrets it. He'll say it was a mistake, a product of the conference, the wine, the confrontation with Clarissa. He'll put his boss suit back on, and the wall between us will be rebuilt, higher and colder than ever. My throat closed up. I couldn't speak. I just lay there, frozen, waiting for the blow to fall. He didn't get up. He just sat there for a long moment, his head in his hands. Then he turned, and even in the dim light, I could see the troubled expression on his face. He reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair off my forehead. "I didn't mean to wake you," he whispered. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. He sighed, a long, heavy sound. "I've just made an incredible mess of things, haven't I?" He wasn't looking at me, but at his hands, as if they were foreign objects. "I'm your boss, Leo. There are rules. There are ethics clauses and power dynamics and 100 reasons why this," he gestured vaguely at the rumpled bed, at the two of us, "is a catastrophic error in judgment." The cold dread solidified in my stomach. Here it was. "But," he said, and he finally looked at me, his gray eyes piercing the darkness. "My only real regret is that I didn't have the courage to do it sooner. That I wasted so much time hiding behind my desk, watching you, wanting you, and doing nothing about it." The breath I had been holding escaped me in a rush. "I don't know what we do now," he continued, his voice raw with honesty. "I don't have a 5-point plan for this. All I know is that walking away from you, pretending that this night didn't happen, is not an option. Not for me." He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "Is it an option for you?" I looked at our joined hands in the pale moonlight. His was larger, warmer, calloused from something other than paperwork. It fit with mine perfectly. I thought about my quiet, empty apartment, my lonely Sundays, my life of careful observation from the sidelines. And I thought about the feeling of his lips on mine, the sound of my name in his mouth, the profound, grounding peace of lying in his arms. The choice was not a choice at all. "No," I whispered, my voice thick. "It's not an option." A slow smile spread across his face, and he leaned down and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss full of reassurance and promise. He settled back down beside me, pulling me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me securely. I rested my head in the hollow of his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. The fear was gone. The anxiety was gone. In the quiet darkness of a hotel room in a strange city, tangled up with my boss, I felt safer than I had ever felt in my entire life. I closed my eyes and, for the first time, slept without dreaming. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight on my face and the weight of an arm draped possessively over my waist. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. The reception, the kiss in the hallway, the raw honesty in the dark, and my eyes snapped open. I was in Julian's bed. The room was bright with morning light, the heavy curtains having been pulled partially open. I turned my head slowly. He was still asleep, his face turned towards me, his expression peaceful and unguarded in a way I'd never seen. The harsh lines of command were smoothed away, leaving him looking younger, more vulnerable. His dark hair was a mess, falling across his forehead. His breathing was deep and even. A wave of tenderness so intense it was painful washed over me. I wanted to reach out, to brush the hair from his eyes, but I didn't want to wake him. So I just lay there, watching him breathe, memorizing the shape of his mouth, the faint stubble on his jaw. This felt more intimate than anything that had happened the night before. This quiet, sun-drenched moment of simple domesticity. Eventually, his eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with sleep for a moment. Then they focused on me, and a slow, soft smile touched his lips. It was a smile meant only for me, and it made my heart ache. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick and gravelly with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back. He tightened his arm around my waist, pulling me closer until our noses were almost touching. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, his gray eyes searching my face. I could feel the familiar anxiety begin to prickle at the edges of my newfound peace. The night was one thing. The night was magic and darkness and whispered confessions. The morning was another. The morning was reality, consequences, the cold, hard light of day. What now? The question hung in the air between us, unspoken but deafening. As if reading my mind, he sighed softly and pulled back, sitting up against the headboard. The sheet pooled around his waist. I felt suddenly exposed and pulled the covers up to my chin. The easy intimacy of the moment was broken. Awkwardness, a clumsy, unwelcome third party, had entered the room. He ran a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. "We have a flight to catch in 4 hours," he said, his voice back to its more familiar, practical tone. It was a simple statement of fact, but it felt like a door closing. "Right?" I said, my own voice sounding small. I sat up too, my back against the headboard, keeping a careful distance between us. We were two men in a bed, who hours before had been closer than I had ever been to another human being, and now we were acting like polite strangers. He got out of bed and started gathering his clothes from the floor, his movements efficient and purposeful. He didn't look at me. I watched his back, the smooth play of muscles under his skin. He was my boss again. He was Julian Vance, CEO, a man who solved problems and made difficult decisions. And I was Leo Bellwether, his subordinate, who had just slept with him on a business trip. The power dynamic we had erased in the darkness came rushing back in the morning light, stark and undeniable. The fear I thought I had banished came back with a vengeance. I had misread everything. The night had been a lapse in judgment for him, a temporary insanity, and now he was resetting things, putting the boundaries back in place before we returned to the real world, to the office. The silence in the room was suffocating. I felt a desperate need to say something, anything, to fix this, but I had no idea what the right words were. He disappeared into the bathroom, and the sound of the shower starting felt like a final verdict. I was alone in his rumpled bed, the scent of him on the pillows, the warmth of his body fading from the sheets. I felt a familiar, crushing loneliness settle over me. It was worse than before, because now I knew what I was missing. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my own clothes, which were scattered in a trail leading from the door. I dressed quickly, my hands fumbling with my buttons. I needed to get back to my own room, to the safety of my own space. I needed to put my armor back on. When he came out of the bathroom, a towel knotted around his waist, his hair damp, I was standing by the door, my shoes on, ready to flee. He stopped when he saw me, his expression unreadable. "Leo," he said. I should go pack." I stammered, not meeting his eyes. "My room." "Wait," he said. He walked over to me, stopping just a few feet away. "Don't run." "I'm not running." I lied, my eyes fixed on the doorknob. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice soft but firm. Slowly, reluctantly, I lifted my gaze to his. The uncertainty, the fear, must have been written all over my face. His expression softened. "This is new for me too," he said quietly. "I'm not good at this. The morning after part. I don't know what the protocol is." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "God, listen to me. Protocol." He stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a stray piece of my own messy hair behind my ear. His touch was gentle, hesitant. "I'm not regretting last night, Leo. I'm just trying to figure out how to protect it. How to protect us. Back there." He gestured vaguely in the direction of our home city. "Things are complicated. There's the board, there's HR, there's a whole company full of people who watch my every move." The knot of anxiety in my chest loosened just a little. He wasn't pushing me away. He was thinking, strategizing. He was treating this like a problem to be solved, which was the most Julian Vance thing he could possibly do. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. For now, he said, his hand sliding from my hair to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. We get on a plane. We go home. And we figure it out. Together, he leaned in and gave me a soft, chaste kiss, a simple press of lips that was more reassuring than any grand declaration. But first, he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, coffee. I think we both need it. The flight home was a strange limbo. We sat next to each other, our shoulders occasionally brushing. We didn't talk much, both of us pretending to be engrossed in reports, but I was acutely aware of his presence, of the quiet rhythm of his breathing. Once, during a bout of turbulence, his hand instinctively covered mine on the armrest, his grip firm and steady until the plane leveled out. It was a small, public gesture that felt like a secret promise. The test, I knew, would be Monday. Walking back into that office, back into our old roles, felt like walking into a minefield. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of my hope. But as we landed, and the plane taxied to the gate, he turned to me. I have a cabin, he said, his voice low so the other passengers couldn't hear. An hour outside the city. It's quiet. No one knows I have it, he paused, his gray eyes holding mine. Come with me this weekend. We can talk. We can just be. No board, no HR. Just us. It was an invitation. A conscious choice. It was the first step in figuring it out, together. Okay, I said, a real smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. Yes, the relief in his eyes was palpable. As we deplaned and walked through the bustling airport, a comfortable silence settled between us once more. It wasn't the awkward, uncertain silence of the hotel room. It was a new silence, one filled with anticipation and a fragile, burgeoning hope. The path forward was unclear, fraught with complications. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't walking it alone. He had given me a key, not to a cabin, but to a possibility, a new beginning. And I was ready to turn it in the lock.